suddenly I can't remember a lot of the stuff that I thought I'd memorized. So I'm pulling out the piece of paper, the 2 sheets. I'm standing in back, and people are bumping into me. People are walking by. People are having conversations, and I can't concentrate. Okay, so welcome to my channel, Comedy Road with Leif Skiving. This channel is all about stand-up comedy and what it's like to be a comedian on the road, what it's like to start out as a comedian, and how your career progresses. And there's different levels, and there's hundreds, maybe even 1,000 comedians out there that are the funniest, most talented people that you've never heard of. And it's basically those stories that I want to tell, including my own. And tell you about the very first time that I was on stage as a stand-up comedian, which was in 1977. And I know you're looking at the screen going, "Oh, guy can't be that old, 77." But yeah. Anyway, so I was at the Comedy Store, and I did not know you could do stand-up comedy at that time before I went up on stage there. I thought that I'd always loved it as a kid, always try to watch The Tonight Show, the Steve Allen Show, all these shows that had stand-up comedians on them, loved impressionists, Rich Little, Frank Gorshin, David Fry, of that era, just very funny people. But I never thought you could do stand-up comedy until I went to, attended the KISS Broadcasting Workshop to learn how to be a radio DJ. Somehow that seemed to be within reach. And then I met this guy there, and I can still remember what he looks like. I remember the conversation. I remember he's from Walla Walla. I cannot remember his name. But in passing, he tells me that he does stand-up comedy at the Comedy Store. And I'm like, really? What do you mean you do stand-up comedy? He goes, well, it's an open mic. You can sign up, and you can go up on stage and do stand-up comedy. And this just totally blew my mind. I had no idea. Comedy Store had been open since 1972, but I was born in Sweden. I was raised in LA, but I was born in Sweden, and I'd gone back 74 and 75. I'd gone back to live in Sweden, and so I kind of missed it somehow. But now I found out that there's a place where you can do comedy. So I went there as a customer, and I was just totally in heaven. Here's just stand-up comedian after stand-up comedian, a club dedicated to doing stand-up comedy. Unbelievable. And immediately I thought, well, if this guy can do it, he's just a regular guy learning how to be a DJ, then I could do it too. And this is awesome. So he told me that you're supposed to call Sunday night between 6 and 8, call the Comedy Store, and they give you a spot for the next night, Monday night, open mic. Nowadays, I'm pretty sure it's a lot harder to get on. A lot more people vying for spots. There weren't that many comedians at that time. It was before the comedy boom of the 80s, when comedy clubs started popping up like mushrooms all across the country. And stand-up comedy was like the hottest thing for about 10 years. This is pre-boom. So I called him up. I got a spot for the next night, 9 p.m., prime time, as I came to find out later, which I had no idea. I'd never done this before. And then I realized, they're giving me 5 minutes. I got to have an act. So Sunday night, I sat down at my old-fashioned typewriter and typed out what I thought was an act of 2 pages of single-spaced material, and it was all based on the movie The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. And why did I pick that? Because I had started doing impressions in junior high school. I would be walking home from school practicing impressions. That was kind of like I said, the first thing that got me interested in stand-up comedy. I remember walking home from 7th grade, and when I finally thought I nailed the very first impression, and that was John Wayne. Oh, that's about the size of it. And so naturally, that's what I went to. And I just seen this movie, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. It had Lee Marvin in it, Jimmy Stewart, John Wayne. I already did these impressions, and I thought that's what I'll do. So I wrote a takeoff, a parody on this film not even thinking that there might be people in the audience that had never seen this movie. I didn't put any introduction. I didn't put any lead in, any explanation. I just started this parody of the movie, assuming that everybody had seen it and loved it as much as I did. And did my best to memorize these 2 pages of single-spaced material with impressions. Next day, I drive up to Hollywood from San Pedro, where I was living, where I grew up, and get there before the doors open. There's about 15, 20 comics standing in line, waiting for the doors to open micers. I just happened to stand in line next to Robert Schimmel, who later turned out to be one of my very favorite guys to watch. Hilarious, and had a great booming career before we tragically lost him in a car accident some years ago. But he was new to LA. He'd just come out from New York, and it was his first time at the Comedy Store and my first time at the Comedy Store. So, it was really nice to meet somebody that hadn't been on stage. I don't know if he'd done open mics in New York or not, but I definitely know it's his first time at the Comedy Store. So right before they open the doors, this guy named Danny Mora comes out. I didn't know his name at the time. I just saw this guy come out, hop up on the wall, wearing a beret, and as I recall, a army surplus jacket, looking like Che Guevara's cousin, or maybe the leader of a revolutionary army in Central America. And Danny was running the store, or at least running the shows, along with a guy named Robert Aguayo at the time, and is somebody that I got to know and love later, and I consider to this day, my comedy mentor, even though I haven't seen him in years. I learned so much from him when I was first starting out. So he gives a little speech about what we're going to do and not do, and we got 5 minutes, and there's a sign, there's a portrait of Eddie Cantor to the left on the stage, and when that lights up, that means you got 1 minute left. You get 5 minutes, that lights up, you got 1 minute to wrap it up, and you get 2 tickets for drinks. And here we go. The doors open up. We get our 2 tickets. We've been told to stand in back. That's where the list was of the order of going up. And I'm excited. I'm with other comedians, and I'm at the Comedy Store. The place is packed. And then I saw the list, and that's when it hit me. I'm at the Comedy Store. The place is packed, and I've got to go up on stage. I have never been so nervous in my life. Boom, just like that. And I'm getting butterflies right now just thinking about it. When I saw the list, when I saw my name on it, the big butterflies hit. And I started getting nervous. And all of a sudden, as I was on at 9, the show started at 8. So the closer it got to my spot, the more I started doubting myself. I started doubting I was funny. I started doubting I'd memorized this stuff. And realized that I can't remember a lot of the stuff that I thought I'd memorized. So I'm pulling out the piece of paper, the 2 sheets. I'm standing in back, and people are bumping into me. People are walking by. People are having conversations, and I can't concentrate. So I go in the men's room so that I can re-memorize what I thought I already had memorized, word for word, which I found out is really not a good way to do it. Try to memorize 5 minutes of material before you go on word for word. But I was new, and that's what I did. And the guy ahead of me was on stage. I was in the men's room. As I was in the men's room going over the material, suddenly I hear myself announced, and I don't know why. I should have just walked out. I should have just left because I was so scared, so nervous, and so full of self-doubt. But I'd also programmed, there's a part of me that just had to do it. So I'd program myself to do it. And I don't even remember how I made it to the stage. I just remember getting in front of that microphone and having spotlights hit me. That was the first big shock that really just threw me into a complete space that I'd never been in, where I just, You know, I don't know if you guys have ever driven in a snowstorm where snow's swirling all around you and you're in your car and it feels like you're spinning, but you know you're going straight. Anyway, that's how my head felt when those lights hit me, because I couldn't see anything. I could just see part of the front row. And huge shock. I'd never been on a stage like that before, never done stand-up before. And the next shock came when I spoke into the microphone. Suddenly I heard my voice boom over this huge PA system, over 200 people, and that threw me into another whirlwind of confusion. But I was bound and determined to do it, so I started spitting out things that I could remember, and it wasn't in order. And there was no explanation for these impressions. There was no setup. There was no intro. It was just bits and pieces of material and impressions out of order, and the audience was completely silent for 4 minutes. Pretty polite, either that or they were just in shock watching this guy having a meltdown on stage. And it was silent for 4 minutes. Then the Eddie Cantor sign lit up. I had 1 minute to finish up. And then the comics in back started heckling me. 4 minutes of silence, and then comics in back started heckling me. And of course, later, as I did more comedy, I came to realize that watching a fellow comedian bomb miserably on stage is probably about the funniest thing a fellow comedian could see. So I didn't know that then, but I was just blocking everything out anyway, so it didn't matter. I just finished my minute, walked off stage, walked all the way to the back where the comics were, made a right all the way over to the door, made another right out the door, and into my Baja Bug VW, and drove back to San Pedro, never having been so humiliated and nervous and scared in my entire life. It took me 6 months before I went back on stage. There was something inside of me that just said I had to do it, but it took 6 months. And then I picked smaller clubs. I remember this one vegetarian restaurant in Hollywood that did open mics once a week. If there was 5 people in the audience, that was a decent audience. If there was 12, it was, wow, this is a great night. And it helped me relax more and be able to ad-lib more and remember my material and develop it. I did that for a while until another major club opened up in LA. There was 2 actually when I started. There was the Comedy Store on Sunset, and there was the Improv on Melrose, which had opened in '74. And then I think in '78 or '79, a place called Osco's Comedy Cave opened up on 3rd and La Cienega, and it was part of Osco's Disco, which was a huge disco. And disco was still at the peak, and the comedy boom hadn't quite started, but, you know, disco was up here and comedy was edging up. And so they put a comedy room downstairs in a club that also held about 200 people with a full bar. And there were a lot of people that became famous from that club. Robert Schimmel was one of them. Paul Rodriguez. I was a regular there for 2 years, and I think that's where I'll end it now. And I'll probably pick up the next episode from there. Hopefully, I can get some interviews in, and hopefully, you guys like it, and you want to hear road stories further on down the line from myself and from other comics that have had the experience of working the road and grinding it out, making a living. Without necessarily being famous. And all right, so if you do like it, please hit subscribe, please hit like, and hit the bell so you'll be notified every time I post a video. And let's do this. Let's have some fun. All right.